Welcome to the Terminology Leading Practice stream of the SNOMED CT Expo 2022. My name is Rory Davidson. I'm the Chief Information Officer at SNOMED International. I'll be moderating today's session. All the questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. Any online attendees, please use the Q&A box to type your questions to the presenter. And anybody in the room, please raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone. I'm now very pleased to introduce Ole Våge, from the Norwegian Directorate of eHealth, who will be presenting Achieving Term Consistency in SNOMEC CT. Ole, please proceed.
Thank you, Rory. Like Rory said, I come from the Norwegian Directorate of eHealth, which is the Norwegian NRC. I'm going to talk about term consistency, which would be relevant for people working with translations, but also people with naming concepts. My presentation will be based on our experiences from translating SNOMEC CT, big parts of SNOMEC CT into Norwegian. Saying that, we didn't do the translations at the NRC. It was done in one of the health regions, Middle Norway. We were introducing SNOMEC CT as a part of the new EHR. Okay. What's happening is that they generously kind of donate to us. We give terminological advices to that health region, and we do a final validation. So it becomes a part of the Norwegian extension. Okay, so during my presentation, I will give some, it will be an example-based talk. So I will use examples from other languages, not just Norwegian. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that relevant, I think. Okay, so doing a translation, it's a huge task. And of course, there are many issues. One of them are, see how, what is this? We stumble upon this, that in some cases, thorax was translated as thorax, the Latin word to the left. Sometimes, in some few cases, brystkasse, the Norwegian word, was being used. And in some cases, also what we call a hybrid word, thorax, that's to your right side. It's a Latin word, but having a Norwegian spelling. I guess this is quite common in some languages, at least in German, maybe Slavic languages, I don't know. It's just, yeah, okay, yeah, it's very typical. So this is clearly an example of inconsistency. This is a problem. It was a problem and is a problem. I will be calling this individual inconsistency because it relates to one concept. I'll come back to what's the difference here with another type of inconsistency, which is this. This is from the otitis here, that when it was external otitis to the left here, we saw that the hybrid form was being used, otit, for otitis, and there was consistency, you know, with acute, this kind of, only this concept. But when we came in the middle here, then they had this Norwegian word, mellomørebetennelse, and inner part of the ear, the Latin word. Is this inconsistency? Arguably, I would say yes, but it can be argued against it also. Right, I will call this family inconsistency because these are really semantically related concepts. So I'll come back to this. Yeah. So we'll come back to this, yeah. So why do we have inconsistency? Because there's term variation in languages. Like I said, we have Latin, the national language, and the hybrid forms. You have abbreviations, you have full forms, you have spellings, etc., etc. And also that we see that inconsistency in the international edition kind of spreads to the national editions. So basic questions. What is, to achieve consistency, we have to have a clear idea what is consistency. And I will also ask, how can I measure the degree of consistency? Regarding individual consistency, remember the case of thorax, normally we think of SNOMED CT as a hierarchy. But for a second, let us think of SNOMED as knowledge being knowledge on a map. Now, a map has longitudes and latitudes. So departing from this idea, this is just a metaphor. I mean, that's not how SNOMED is structured, but just as a metaphor, we can say that, and this probably is known for you, then we say that there is horizontal consistency, that you start from a supporting hierarchy, like body structure. This is a case of from the Dutch, thorax, opted for the Latin word. And the point here is to, in a disorder hierarchy, use the preferred term from the body structure hierarchy and same with procedure. Okay, so this will give horizontal consistency through the hierarchy. And another point is that it also gives coherence. It's when you do, there is this idea that that also words should be structured, not only concepts underneath the words. Yeah. Okay, that's horizontal consistency. And then you have vertical consistency. This is a Swedish example. You start from an upper concept, glaucom. I think that it could have been a different word. I mean, there could have been theoretically, is it Grönstad or something like that? Yeah. Okay. So the upper concept decides which should be the translations when you go down. Principle of inheritance. Okay. So how do we solve this then? What we have done is that, as we learned from the Swedish and the other countries also doing this, we made a spreadsheet for the most important concepts, those who can make inconsistency. Like the example here, it's quite a big spreadsheet, and this one says that fracture should always be translated as fraktur as a preferred term and brudd as a synonym. What we are doing here is that we are introducing fracture as a regular expression. That means that we can, using a machine, to harvest all the FSNs, English FSN, which has fracture, and introduce, okay, how should I put it? We are using a translation tool from reference and translation tool. So when the people going through doing the validation, they will get this information in a notes field because it's machine readable. So this information for a spreadsheet is imported into the translation tool, so they can know that fracture has to be translated fraktur as a preferred term and brudd as a synonym. Okay, so we are using spreadsheets. This is because the translation tool doesn't have any memory. I mean, it could, if you have another tool, this can be done by using a translation memory. Okay, that's how we do this. We don't always. There are exceptions. For example, some cases, if you go further down the hierarchy, we decide that okay, Brock is not the preferred term because that's a Norwegian word for hernia. That in some cases we don't use Brock in very detailed cases. Use Latin word, for example. So, and I think other countries also do this. This kind of deviation when you come down into hierarchy. Okay. So now I talked about family consistency, and of course you would expect that left and right would be consistent. This is the Danish case, the abbreviation CT. Also upper and lower, these are kind of oppositional consistency. Actually, this is a case of inconsistency because we discovered that eyelid in the cyst of upper eyelid was translated to halvebra, while in the lower it was øyelokk. Okay, but I think everybody can agree that there should be consistency in these male, female, these oppositional categories, and in Spanish you have this hipotensión arterial, hyper. So you have these prefixes: hyper, hypo, intro, extra. There should be consistency. This a kind of consistency. In that case, I think there's something changing in the new edition. So that's not the best example. Okay. Anyway, then you have something different: complementary family consistency. For example, those are not based on oppositions, but complementarity, like the cerebral nerves. They can be written in Latin or in Norwegian, word or number. So we discovered that neoplasm of olfactory nerve they were used the Latin word for that nerve. When it was in the case of optic, there was a Norwegian word was being used, and oculomotor nerve, then the number was being used. Clearly, I think everybody would agree, but it's arguable. But there should be consistency across the cerebral nerves, right? So that's another kind of consistency or lack of consistency in this case. And another one is adjacent family consistency, when it could be organs or something which are close to each other. Like this is the small bones in the ear, like incus, malleus, stapes. Then we opted for using the Norwegian word, right? Because they are very related, but based on location, not opposition or complementarity. It could be, but this one is hard, because when do you stop? I mean, within an organ or neighbor organs, this principle, it's kind of hard to enforce for us. So, but it's at least we have some way to express this kind of consistency, and that's the point of this talk, that we need language to talk about consistency before we can reach consistency, right? And yeah. And then we have processes, which is a different kind of consistency, like calcification of muscle. Then we saw that the Norwegian word was being used. It could be calcificering, the Latin, and it's a very related process of ossification, where the Latin word was being used. Now, should there be consistency there, that we should have used Norwegian or Latin or hybrid? I'm not sure. I'd like to hear your opinion about this. We discussed this, if there should be consistency in this case. It's not that obvious as some previous cases. And of course, there are other kinds of consistencies or lack of consistencies, like morphosyntactic. I'm not going to talk about that. From the last example, of muscle or muscular, for example. That's another type. Or contingent consistency versus absolute. Absolute always, contingent it depends. Like for example, benign. We use benign, benign in Norwegian with Latin or hybrid words. That's contingent on the other word, the adjective to some kind of word, and use godaktet with Norwegian words. So this is kind of a contingent consistency. Okay, and my second part will address how to measure consistency. It's a proposal. It's based on the Herfindahl-Hirshman Index, which is from economics, and this index is being used to measure the degree of market concentration. So what you do, you take the market share of different companies and you square them and add them, and you get this number, this formula there. So let's do something. It's not my proposal. It's something being done in terminology science from linguistic point of view, that you swap. You don't think about market concentration of a company, but the market concentration of a term. While in the first case, you want to avoid monopoly. It's being used to measure the degree of monopoly. in our case, we kind of want monopoly, don't we? Monopoly is kind of consistency in linguistics. So what several studies have done is to introduce this formula and do a calculation of the relative frequency of a synonym using this formula, and then you get a number between 1 and 10. A number close to 10 would be monopoly or consistency. A lower number would be kind of synonyms competing a lot. Okay, so how did we proceed doing this? We analyzed some corpora, text corpora, medical association corpora, just to see, how is the normal language behaving? Not SNOMED CT, but the language of medicine. Is there inconsistencies? Of course, but it's interesting that we're interested to know to which degree. That's why we introduced this number. Okay, so you take Tyroidea, which is written at least 5 different ways in Norwegian. There are even more we've seen. I mean, with the full form. Anyway, and we calculate the absolute frequency in this journal and the relative frequency, and we introduce these numbers into this. We square them and add them into this formula, and we get 4.71, a number which doesn't say anything by itself. In order to have this number meaning, we have to compare it over time, the same or with others, or maybe establishing a threshold for what kind of, to which degree, or when should something be done if there's too much inconsistency, or where shall we start fixing first when we're going to fix inconsistencies. So what we did, in tumor, for example, there is less inconsistency using a tumor in this journal. You could argue that neoplasm and tumor is not exactly the same, but that's not the point here. Okay, so what we did at a certain point in time, we did this calculation of to which degree there was consistency in our extension. So to the case of Tyroidea, and it was the point 6.2 in 1st of May. It's like, something has to be done. This is not good. So we did some work, and it's 8.1. It's better. We know where to go next, but yeah. While in the case of tumor, it's been fairly good. Yeah. Now I'm kind of showing the good examples. Våge and a colleague, we discover almost every day inconsistency. It's not a mature translation. We just finished the good part. So yeah. So it's not a story of success. Yeah. But we think that when you do a translation, it could be a good idea to monitor consistency. So then I want to finally to discuss some points here. Is it a problem? Always. Depends. I mean, you could argue that it's a problem for retrievability, that if you sometimes have to use thorax, sometimes brystkasse, you wouldn't find the concepts you're looking for. But you said, yeah, but just if you introduce synonyms and there's inconsistency there, you'll find them no matter. But then it's like this structural approach, that coherence, that when there is systematics in the modeling of concepts, there should be systematics in the terms. That's kind of a quality measurement. Good job in making translations, and also it's a source of confusion. Sometimes inconsistencies. This is the principle of differentiation in linguistics. That if you have different words, people tend to look for different content. Like, different words here. They must mean something different, and you start looking for the differences, even though there are none. And my last question is consistency the most important criteria when in translation? No, absolutely not. It's we have national language guidelines, and it's not the most important thing. We look at which words are the most frequent one, but consistency is important. So that's why we are kind of establishing this language of consistencies. Yeah, I think that was it.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. Ole will now take questions. As a reminder, if in the room, please raise your hand and we'll make sure you get a microphone. So questions start.
You mentioned the terming inconsistency within the international release. I'm wondering, is the inconsistency in terming the international release a direct cause of the inconsistency in the translations, or is there a relationship between the two?
It's not the only cause, definitely not. I mean, there are other causes. Different people doing translation and validation have different prefer different terms. That I think that's the most important cause in the process. And but I think that we haven't measured, to which degree these are caused by inconsistencies in the international edition. But it's a hypothesis, and I think it's fair to say that it's causing it. When you see, especially in the cases where you see this direct translation, they use like a muscular or then you can see it in translation. They're using the same morphosyntactic construction as in the international edition. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned also the analysis of a corpus, but my question is, couldn't corpus analysis also give you arguments against consistency? Yeah. For instance, in German language, we use for heart and stomach, we also always or mostly use the German term. For pancreas, we use the Latin term. And also the German term for pancreas is more lay language, and the Latin term for stomach is very, very little used. So what do you think about that?
It's getting back to the most important principle for us is the usage. I mean, the end user should meet the language they're used to, and then we use the corpus to find out which are the most frequent terms. But then we also discover that, like in the case of hernia, Brock is the most frequent. But then we search in the corpus for those lower down, and it's like we couldn't find anything with Brock. So in that case, we use the corpus to make the deviation from this consistency. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions on the floor? Let's check online. Okay, no other questions online. So, question at the back. This keeps happening.
Sorry. No idea what I was. Sorry. Great timing. Yeah. No, what I want to ask was, so we are very familiar with this kind of battle, and we have lots of guidelines like you saying, translate this phrase like this and translate this phrase like that, choose the Latin here, choose the Dutch there. And we discovered then a third kind of inconsistency, which is within the actual phrase you're translating, that one structure is, we chose the Latin term and another we chose the Dutch term, and because it's SNOMED, it did manage to combine them in a single disorder, and now we have this weird juxtaposition. And what would you recommend there? Because I've never been able to choose a reasonable strategy there.
I don't know. I can't answer it because this is. I mean, I present some categories for inconsistencies. I don't say that we have to follow them always, but I think that we should have this category to at least discuss them, to have an opinion about them. This would be another, and of course there is this kind of a total consistency. I think it was discussed in the beginning that always use Latin no matter what, or always use hybrid. I think, yeah, and of course then you would then would create translations which would not be recognizable. I mean, just to make it easy, I think it was proposed by some of the translators, and that will be the quick fix. Then we'll achieve consistency, but then that would render in some cases a natural language, but most cases something unrecognizable language in the SNOMEC CT. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. With that, we'll conclude the session. Thank you very much, Ole Va. Online delegates can join another session through the event lobby. Thank you.